A Portuguese archaeologist just discovered a bunch of sunken ships filled with gold, including a Spanish galleon with 22 tons of gold and silver. This much gold today is worth about $2 billion, and this is the money from one ship alone. Archaeologist Alexandre Monteiro made this discovery almost by accident. He was studying some documents when he found some information about a ship that went missing in 1615, and he decided he wanted to find it. After many years, Alexandre found not just this specific ship, he actually discovered 8,620 shipwrecks in the waters of Portugal alone. Out of this number, 250 are gold-filled shipwrecks, a discovery that would make any Jack Sparrow shake in his boots. Most of these ships went down for boring reasons like the weather, but sometimes they were destroyed in battles, which may or may not have been super epic. They were carrying gold and other treasures from the New World to Europe, and of course, everyone wanted a share. Alexandre had been studying historical shipwrecks for 30 years now, so he has discovered many ships that went down in somewhat glorious ways. In 1816, for example, a ship of one of the richest men in Portugal sank in Australia, with an insane amount of 66,000 silver coins. This was the first ship from Portugal to ever plunge in the waters of Australia. The bad news is that these ancient sunken vessels, filled with riches and epic stories, are not so easy to reach. They're deep down in the ocean and covered by sand. You could still try, but that would be stealing part of a country's history, and you wouldn't want to be that person, would you? Naturally, Portugal was not the only country that explored the seas back then. The coast of Europe is packed with sunken ships filled with gold. In fact, there are about 1 million historical shipwrecks underwater right now, and the treasures abandoned under the sea might be worth around $60 billion. It's an insane amount of money, but let me tell you that these gold-filled sunken ships aren't really worth the hassle. There are many stories of maritime treasure discoveries that turned into insane lawsuits and even long jail time. Our first story starts in 1746, when a violent storm crashed a ship called Prince de Conti near an island in Brittany. The ship was filled with tea, ceramics, and 100 gold ingots. Of course, the owners of the ship tried to save the loot, but if it's not easy now, imagine how it was back in the 18th century. It took more than 200 years for the vessel to be found. It finally happened in 1975, when a group of French men discovered it and decided to take pretty much every valuable thing they could find. Now, I said these things were not worth the trouble for a reason. In France, if you find anything that can be historical, you must declare it to the local authorities within 48 hours. Fail to comply, and you will be committing something known as a crime. To be fair, our French friends here did declare their findings, but only the corroded cannons from the ship. And the gold? Well, they sold it. Obviously, because each gold bar is worth between $125,000 to $231,000. It took French authorities almost 50 years to retrieve the stolen gold, and they didn't retrieve all of it. Part of it was bought by an elderly couple living in Florida, and the crime is so serious they were charged for connection with money laundering, organized crime, and the trafficking of cultural goods. The poachers also sold some gold ingots to the British Museum collection. Now, let's go back to the 1850s, when a steamer called SS Central America traveled from Panama to California and back again. This was during the Californian Gold Rush, a time when 300,000 people moved to California to dig for gold. Because the travel route was not easy breezy, people needed to carry their gold around on big ships. This is where our friend SS Central America comes in. In 1857, the ship had 578 people on board and about 10 tons of gold. Very few survived, and around $100 to $150 million in gold went down with the ship. All of this explains why in 1988, a group of investors from Columbus decided to finance a research project to find this ship. The research was led by a guy named Tommy Thompson, Tommy was really crazy about the idea of finding this sunken ship filled with gold. It took him years to find the exact location of the SS Central America, especially because the ship was 7,500 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, and retrieving it required a lot of fancy tech. A group of 161 investors paid for his adventure, but it goes without saying that they were not doing this out of love from their hearts. They invested $12.5 million in this project because they were expecting to earn at least 10 times more. But since life is not all sunshine and rainbows, 39 insurance companies sued the research team as soon as they retrieved the gold. Back when the ship was up and running, these companies insured the cargo of the SS Central America, and when the cargo was finally retrieved, more than 100 years later, they wanted to be compensated. They said it was not their job to retrieve it, but that doesn't mean they abandoned it. This crazy talk didn't stick, and 92% of the gold was given to the research team. The plot thickened when the investors were scammed by none other than Tommy Thompson, who fled with $4.16 million. He also had 500 gold coins, but he's not telling a soul where they are. Nonsense like this is the reason why most countries have rules to protect cultural properties. And yes, sometimes shipwrecks can be a cultural property. Obviously, there are many maritime treasure discoveries that happen without breaking any laws. The SS City of Cairo, for example, was a steamship that submerged in 1929 with 2,000 boxes of silver coins weighing 122 tons. A company called Deep Ocean Search retrieved the coins from a depth of 17,000 feet, which is 4,500 feet lower than the Titanic. 34 million pounds went to the UK Treasury, and the Deep Ocean Search also got a share. The good news here is that some of the coins can be bought by collectors, legally. Paying for a treasure is probably the closest you can get to an underwater archaeology find. I know, all I did was destroy your piracy dreams. But while raiding gold-filled shipwrecks may be a crime in most countries, or just financially impossible for us mere mortals, not all hope is lost. There is about $771 trillion worth of gold lying on the ocean floor, and it doesn't have an owner. It's like an underwater gold mine, except the gold is in the water. You know how the water of the ocean is salty? Well, the gold gets mixed with the minerals in the water, so it's not like you stumble upon a gold nugget on the beach. Each liter of ocean water has 13 billionths of a gram of gold, and it's very difficult to extract such tiny particles of gold from the water. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried, and of course, there's been a scam here too. In the 1890s, a guy claimed he had invented a thing that would suck gold from the seawater. When he got enough money, he fled the country with the cash. If you really want to get some gold, you could try to extract it from the Earth's core, which has 1.6 quadrillion tons of gold. There's 16 times more gold in the Earth's core than what humans have mined in the whole of history. No hoax involved here, because nobody has dared to go down there yet. With archaeologists discovering gold-filled sunken ships out and about, maybe we can make our own maritime treasure discoveries, or at least save enough money to buy some silver coins. A ship filled with gold and other treasures worth over $13 million was found in the middle of the Namibian desert after almost 500 years. The worker who found it was actually looking for diamonds, but ended up with something way more valuable for history. There were some blocks of copper, some wood, pipes, and elephant tusks. The miners called for an archaeologist, who soon realized it wasn't a disturbed beach like they thought, but a shipwreck. All evidence showed that it was a Portuguese trading vessel, Bom Jesus, that went missing in the 16th century. Experts believe it was a special kind of ship that was bigger, stronger, and better than older ships from Portugal and Spain. These ships were built to take Portuguese explorers on long trips to distant places like India, China, and Japan, and come back with tons of cargo. The Bom Jesus was likely carrying treasures from Lisbon, Portugal to western India. But it looks like on its way around the southern tip of Africa, near Namibia, a big storm pushed the ship too close to the shore. The ship hit a rock, tipped over, and broke apart, sinking into the ocean. Archaeologists found treasure from the captain's chest under the water, which probably fell out when the ship's wooden hull broke. They also found pieces of the ship scattered along the shore, likely from the violent storm and later by construction in the area. The storm must have been very fierce, but they didn't find many bones, which means most of the crew may have survived or were lost at sea. The ship was split into 3 sections and incredibly well preserved, thanks to the thick layers of sand that covered it and prevented rot. Archaeologists who studied the wreck discovered over 40 tons of cargo. There were cannons, swords, blocks of metal like lead and tin, fabrics, and tools that sailors used to navigate the stars while traveling across the ocean. The most exciting discovery was 1,845 copper ingots, weighing as much as 16 to 17 tons altogether. Those copper ingots, or pieces of pure metal, are still in great condition because the hull of the ship and layers of sand protected them from ocean water. The scientists even managed to read the trademarks on them on site and learned they were made by a super wealthy German trading company. There were also more than 2,000 shiny gold and silver coins from different countries, and 105 enormous elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely supposed to become luxury items, like jewelry or carvings at the destination. Archaeologists took some DNA samples from the tusks and found that they came from West African forests and savanna elephants. Researchers were lucky that the ship was found in a restricted diamond mining area. No scavengers were able to get their hands on the treasures. The Bom Jesus remains the oldest and most valuable shipwreck that was ever discovered off the western coast of sub-Saharan Africa. Another shipwreck recently found by accident was buried under a 10-foot tall sand dune near the Caspian Sea. Some people call it the world's largest lake, and it has water levels that rise and fall over time because of the changes in weather patterns. These changes can move sand and uncover things like this shipwreck and other treasures along the coast. As the dune slowly disappeared, the ship started to show. Before digging it out, scientists worried that waves from the sea might damage the wreck. To protect it, they built a wall using thousands of sandbags to keep the waves away. When the ship was uncovered, they discovered it was a 3-masted, 92-foot-long merchant ship with a strong double hull. Wood samples showed the ship was built in the 18th to 19th century using trees like Scots pine, spruce, and larch from the Volga River area or the Caucasus. They even found buckwheat and plants from the same region, which were probably traded or used to feed the sailors. It proves that the ship was part of a group of merchant ships that once sailed the Caspian Sea. An amateur fisherman who was 20 feet under the sea off the coast of Turkey noticed some huge metal remains. He had an underwater camera, so he made footage of the discovery and took it to scientists. They immediately started an investigation and learned that it must be a shipwreck from the first decades of the 20th century. It could be one of the Ottoman Empire ships that had an important mission to deliver supplies, but disappeared without a trace. Scientists got permission to study this Black Sea wreck in detail to learn more about its mysteries. They're hoping to find its shipyard documents to find some answers, as the ship itself is in terrible condition and is tricky to work with. Robot submersibles that belong to an oil and gas company noticed hundreds of intact ancient storage jars sitting on the seabed in the eastern Mediterranean. Experts think those jars are 3,300 years old. This makes the find the oldest shipwreck from the deep sea. The jugs were probably used to store oil or other agricultural products like fruit. This proves that the people who made them organized maritime trade and had incredible navigational skills. It looks like the ancient mariners managed to traverse the Mediterranean Sea without a line of sight to any coast. All they could see was the horizon, so they must have used the sun and other stars to find their way. Off the coast of Sicily, under 20 feet of sand and rock, archaeologists found a shipwreck so old that they aren't even sure what materials were used to build it. They think the ship is from the 5th or 6th century BCE, which means it's over 2,500 years old. This ancient ship wasn't alone. Researchers also found 2 iron anchors shaped like an upside-down T from around the 7th century of the Common Era, and 4 stone anchors from prehistoric times nearby. One of the stone anchors was broken and may have had wooden pieces attached to help it hold on to the seafloor. They figured out that the ship itself was built using the on-shell technique. The wooden planks of the ship were connected so tightly that they could support the ship on their own, with extra beams added just to make it stronger. Sadly, the ship's wooden hull is very fragile now because tiny sea creatures that eat wood have damaged it over the years. Scientists are being extra careful as they study it to make sure it doesn't fall apart. This discovery is such a big deal because it was built during a time when Sicily was super important for trade. Back then, the Greeks and Punics were trying to take control of the seas long before Rome became the ruler of the Mediterranean. By studying this ship, scientists hope to learn more about how people traveled and traded in those ancient times. One more shipwreck, this time off the coast of Kenya. Could be from Vasco da Gama's final voyage. This Portuguese explorer was the first European to reach India by sea around the Cape of Good Hope. Local fishermen discovered the shipwreck in question in 2013. When an underwater archaeologist came to check it out, he found some treasures at the spot: elephant tusks and valuable copper ingots. If this find really has to do with Vasco da Gama, then it must be from the 16th century. It was the year of his 3rd and final voyage to India. Da Gama led a huge fleet of 20 ships, one of which was the São Jorge. Most of the ship is hidden under layers of coral, and a whole team of scientists are carefully digging trenches to find parts of the ship's wooden frame and hull.
The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So, a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life. So it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligalas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport Verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, only one, John Omond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The Fiery Star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the Fiery Star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the Fiery Star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Oman, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape.
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Ubidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos, but Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Girza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
Back in December 2012, a lot of people were freaking out over the idea that the world might end in some catastrophic event. And it was all thanks to the famous Maya calendar. This ancient way of tracking time had been the subject of endless speculation. But one of its biggest mysteries was definitely an 819-day count found in some versions of the calendar. No one could explain why it was there or how it worked, until recently, when a group of researchers from Cambridge might have finally cracked the code. First things first, how does the Maya calendar work? So the system the Maya civilization used to track days was based on something we now call the calendar round. Think of it like 3 interlocking gears. These are 3 cycles working together. The first is a 365-day solar year, known as Hab. The second is a cycle of 20 names. And the third is a cycle of 13 numbers, which forms a 260-day sacred calendar, called Sulkin. Just like we'd say something like December 25th, 2025, they named their days based on how these 3 cycles lined up. For example, here we have the day 3 Manik and the 14th of the month Hop. It takes 52 years for the 3 cycles to align in the same way again. After that, the days start repeating. But this is where things start to get more complicated and mysterious. On some Mayan monuments, we have also found enigmatic inscriptions pointing to the existence of another cycle, the 819-day count. There are about 20 examples of these inscriptions, mostly found in places like Palenque and Yaxchilan in Mexico. So it didn't seem random at all, and this calendar must have been hiding a big secret. Early research showed that the 819-day cycle was represented by one of 4 colors and the cardinal directions associated with them. Black was tied to the west, red to the east, white to the north, and yellow to the south. Researchers also discovered that this period of time could be broken down into 3 smaller cycles. One of 9 days, one of 7 days, and one of 13 days. Multiply them together, and you'd get 819 days. Pretty cool, but why did they do that? This color scheme and the 3 cycles seemed like a basic level of interpretation, and experts were pretty sure its real purpose was still hidden from us. Another thing researchers noticed is that this strange count of days was mostly shown using a Y glyph, followed by a number. But in some cases, they also added a glyph representing Kawil. This was a powerful Maya deity, often associated with creation and lightning. He was usually symbolized by a torch coming out of his forehead, representing the spark of life. But in the 90s, a study suggested that when Kawil's inscription showed smoke and fire coming from his forehead, it could actually represent the planets Jupiter or Saturn, or maybe even both. Wait, that means that the 819 days count could be linked to both planets in some way. From there, research focused on figuring out what that link might be. The first conclusion is that this calendar might have helped the Maya track the movements of those planets in some way. Then they started noticing something interesting. These cycles could be specifically tied to the synodic periods of Jupiter and Saturn. By synodic periods, we mean the time it takes for a celestial body, like a planet, to return to the same or nearly the same position as seen from Earth. While this possibility was pretty exciting, something didn't quite add up. Each planet moves very differently, and trying to fit multiple planets into an 819-day span just didn't seem to work. In other words, this 4-part color-coded calendar system was simply too short to align perfectly with the synodic periods of the visible planets. So it looks like we're back to square one. This mystery had people scratching their heads for ages, until 2023, when specialists realized they might have been looking at it all wrong. Researchers actually needed to shift their perspective. Instead of seeing this system as 819 days, they needed to consider the number as representing timelines. And this period of time could be just a small part of a much, much bigger calendar. You see, as we said earlier, this cycle seemed to track the period when a planet became visible to people on Earth. To prove that these 819 cycles were timelines, not actual days, researchers needed a planet that could serve as a starting point to back up their theory. In this case, it was Mercury. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. Mercury's synodic period is 117 days, which fits perfectly into the calendar count. I mean, if you take 1819 and divide by 117, you get the number 7. So, Mercury is the only visible planet whose synodic cycle fits neatly into this period as whole numbers. Perfect. Now they had a solid starting point. From there, they needed to expand the calendar by increasing its length to 20 periods of 819 days. Suddenly, a pattern emerges. And just like that, all the synodic cycles of the planets fit perfectly into the system. For example, Saturn's synodic period from 378 days lines up perfectly after 6 819-day cycles. Venus aligns every 5 cycles. Jupiter every 19 cycles. And Mars, which takes the longest, needs 20 cycles. In other words, it takes about 45 years for Mars to align with the synodic periods of all visible planets. So, this is how researchers determined that the ancient civilization wasn't referring to days, but rather to timelines. The Maya astronomers came up with this count as part of a larger calendar system of 20 periods. But then a question comes up. Why was studying the synodic period so important to the Maya? Well, we don't have super specific answers about this mysterious calendar yet. But what we can say for sure is that the Maya truly believed in the powerful influence of the cosmos on daily life. So maybe they wanted to analyze how the movements of all the visible planets lined up with their other calendars. Of course, this system is just one part of the Maya's amazing and advanced understanding of astrology. And it wasn't just about using astrological cycles for planting and harvesting. They also had crazy specific knowledge, like how to predict solar eclipses. Archaeologists believe the Maya connection to the stars is reflected in the ruins of their world. Take the famous pyramid in the ancient city of Chichen Itza, located in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. If you look closely at the base of its staircase, you will see a snake's head carved in stone. But here's the coolest part. During the spring and fall equinoxes, when day and night are exactly the same length, the sun casts sharp, triangular shadows on the staircase. It creates the illusion of a snake slithering down the steps. Another example of how they use their knowledge of astronomy in their temples is in Tikal, Guatemala. Built around year 1 of the Common Era, this pyramid is considered one of the Maya's earliest astronomical complexes. And its alignment and orientation allowed them to track and calculate solstices and equinoxes with incredible precision. The Maya were skilled skywatchers. Just like we have modern-day high-tech observatories with round domes, they had something similar. Meet El Caracol. The name means snail in Spanish and refers to the spiral staircase inside the tower. Built around 906 Common Era, it was the perfect place to observe all the changes in the sky and track the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Unlike us today, with our telescopes, satellites, and advanced tools, the Maya relied entirely on naked eye observation, and that makes their achievements even more incredible.
Take a look at these stones. They seem ordinary at first glance, just ancient slabs, ruins of some buildings. However, unlike many other archaeological finds, this one is among the most mysterious and unique. Here's why. These stones are the remains of a large temple complex called Puma Punku, located in Bolivia. Scientists aren't certain, but it's likely that Puma Punku was built by the Tiahuanaco Empire, which existed between 300 and 1000 CE, before the Inca Empire. There is no information suggesting that this civilization had advanced building technologies. Moreover, they might not have even had a writing system. Every stone was carved and polished with astonishing precision. They fit together perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle. The craft is so refined that not even a razor blade can pass between the stones. Quite impressive for people who lived around 1500 years ago. And these stones are heavy. The largest ones weighed around 130 tons. So, how did the builders transport such weight from one place to another? Scientists suggest that this civilization did not know about the invention of the wheel. So, how did they manage to build such a perfect engineering structure? Did Tiahuanaco have the knowledge and tools for stonework? Or did someone else build Puma Punku? There are several theories about this. Theory 1. There was some advanced civilization that came to South America, interacted with Tiahuanaco, built this engineering marvel, and then left. Theory 2. Some beings from another planet came to Earth, showed humans how to build perfect structures, and created Puma Punku. This theory is dubious. Another idea from this series suggests that Puma Punku was built by mythological creatures from the South American culture at that time. Theory 3, the most likely one. There is no mystery here. Tiahuanaco was indeed an advanced civilization with incredible building technologies. So, what do you think? Okay, we've seen some pretty rectangular stones used for building a temple. How about perfectly round stones for studying the starry sky? Or for some other purpose, it doesn't matter. So, welcome to Costa Rica. In the south of this country lies the so-called dicospheres. These are large, heavy, round stones created in the pre-Columbian era, around 600 CE. Now, each stone is made from a unique type of rock formed from cooled magma. In other words, someone waited for a volcanic eruption to end and for all the magma to cool, and then took all this material and carved these spheres from it. But how did they achieve such a perfect shape? Scientists suggest that people used small stones to grind and carve the cooled magma. Some specialists think that the stones were made for navigation. They could have indicated the way to certain places. Another theory claims that the Dica squares were used for astronomy. No one knows for sure. We may never get the answer to this question because the people who knew the secret of the stones disappeared after the Spanish expansion. So, let's continue our journey. See these cobblestones? Archaeologists still don't know why they're arranged along a long stretch of desert crossing Jordan and Israel. These strange stones form a chain of lines 40 miles long and have been here since around 300 BCE. Because they were discovered by pilots during flights about 100 years ago, some call these stones kites. One of the more popular theories suggests that people placed these structures here to lure animals into a pit where they could be caught. Apparently, ancient hunters knew the behavior of local fauna well, and were sure the animals would somehow walk along these stones, ending up in an open area with a pit where hunters could easily do their work. Perfectly smooth rectangular and square stones, round stones, stone traps for animals. What's next? How about a stone canvas or stone painting? To see this ancient artifact, we'll travel to Glasgow, Scotland, where archaeologists unearthed a stone slab created about 5,000 years ago. It is called the Cockno Stone. The slab measures 43 by 26 feet, about half a basketball court. And this entire area is filled with strange swirling patterns that scientists call cup and ring marks. But what do they mean? As usual, scientists don't know for sure. But one theory suggests that the inscriptions on the stone are somehow related to astronomical phenomena, such as lunar or solar eclipses. Maybe it was a star map, or maybe people just wanted to create a work of art. In any case, there is another interesting fact related to the cup and ring marks. Scientists have found similar drawings in other prehistoric sites around the world. Okay, let's step away from mysterious stones and look at some other archaeological mysteries. Here is the approximate order of civilization development starting from 8000 BCE, according to scientists. First, people settle in one place and build a city or settlement there. Then they engage in agriculture, and after that, they build temples. But in 1994, archaeologists said, no, the order might have been different. What if people first built temples to worship higher mythical beings and only then built cities and engaged in agriculture? Let's go to Turkey, to the rural area of Göbekli Tepe, where in the mid-1990s, archaeologists discovered several stone pillars with carved animals on them. This ancient structure dates back to around the 10th millennium BCE. Now, this place is considered one of the oldest places of worship in the world. Most likely, it was built by semi-nomadic hunters who knew nothing about agriculture because it appeared in this region 5 centuries later. Now, scientists are wondering, is it true that such structures led to the settlement of the area? The answer to this question may help understand the mindset and development of humanity in many parts of our planet. So, would you like a scroll with the location of a treasure marked on it? You could say you already have one. Check it out yourself. Just Google the Copper Scroll Treasure. Download a high-resolution photo of the scroll and follow the instructions. Oops! The instructions are written in an incomprehensible language. Scientists have been trying to decipher this message since the scroll was discovered in 1952 in Qumran, and the answer is still not found. According to one theory, the scroll contains information about a large amount of silver and gold. But even if the treasure does not exist, this artifact is still quite interesting to study. It was created around 2,000 years ago, during the time when the Roman Empire ruled over the settlement of Qumran. Perhaps the local residents hid their valuables from the Roman legionnaires and left such a map for their descendants. When you approach this archaeological wonder, you won't notice anything. But if you rise into the air and look down at the ground, you'll see amazing patterns created by the people of the Nazca culture. This discovery is called the Nazca Lines. Pilots and passengers of commercial aircraft first noticed them in the 1920s and 30s during flights over Peru. These large drawings consist of geometric lines, complex images of animals, and whimsical figures. More than 2,000 years ago, people removed part of the surface soil of this land and created these patterns. But why? The Nazca Lines continue to captivate researchers and enthusiasts alike. Recent technological advancements, such as drone imagery and satellite mapping, have provided new insights into these enigmatic formations. Some researchers are now exploring the possibility that the lines serve multiple purposes, including communication with someone not from our world. And to some extent, this is true. Some scientists believe that the Nazca Lines were a ritual method for communicating with the deities of the Nazca civilization. Studying these archaeological wonders not only enriches our knowledge of the past, but also inspires us to appreciate the ingenuity and creativity of the human spirit.
In 1850, French scientist Auguste Mariette went to Egypt looking for manuscripts, but accidentally found a head of a sphinx sticking out of the dunes. He cleared the sand and figured out the Sphinx was guiding the entrance to some underground construction. Several months later, he finally entered the Serapeum of Saqqara. Inside, he found an enormous granite sarcophagi with remnants of 64 bulls. Scientists are still amazed by the tech that the ancient Egyptians used to transport those enormous boxes. The Serapeum was built around the year 3000 before the Common Era. It was an underground tomb built to honor the sacred Apis bulls of ancient Egypt. It had a long hallway, almost 500 feet long, with giant stone rooms on both sides. Some of the sarcophagi weighed as much as 50 average cars, and all of them were made with super precision, with exact 90-degree angles. These sarcophagi were beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and carvings that told stories about the lives and importance of the Apis bulls. Now, there are 24 sarcophagi left. In ancient Egypt, Apis bulls were very special animals connected to the deity Ptah. They thought the bulls carried Ptah's spirit and wisdom, helped the pharaoh, and protected the Egyptians. Priests looked for special markings on young bulls to find Apis bulls. It could be a white triangle on its forehead, which symbolized divine light, a shape on its back like a vulture's wing, and a scarab shape under its tongue, which stood for rebirth. If a bull had these signs, they believed it was chosen by Ptah and treated it like royalty. The chosen bulls lived in a special temple in Memphis, the city where they worshipped Ptah. They received the best care and offerings from visitors who wanted their blessings. When an Apis bull passed away, it was treated with great honor and mummified. When Mariette entered the Serapeum, he noticed traces of rollers on the gallery's floor and found 2 wooden horizontal winches. Each had 8 levers. Later, other explorers saw double rails. The burial chambers were lower than the hallway floor. To get the boxes into place, workers filled the chambers with sand so the sarcophagi could be rolled in straight. Then they slowly removed the sand to gently lower the boxes into perfectly cut spaces in the bedrock. A carved stone sign found in the Serapeum said it took 28 days to move just one sarcophagus and its lid into its spot during the time of Ptolemy II. The extreme precision of the sarcophagi with 90-degree angles also has an explanation. Ancient Egyptians wrote texts, or rather, papyrus, on geometry a long time ago. It shows that they knew the approximate number pi and could calculate the volume of a pyramid with its top cut off. If they could figure out complicated math like that back then, it makes sense that they could also carve perfectly flat surfaces 500 years later. All this sounds pretty legit, but some people think certain things don't add up here. The size of boxes is way larger than the size of bulls, yet they buried pharaohs in tiny coffins that barely fit their bodies. The sarcophagi are made out of granite with crazy precision, and they could have just used limestone, which would have made things way easier. The transportation of the boxes seems pretty simple, but only in theory. If one person could pull about 440 pounds, then at least 250 people would be needed to pull just one box. The tunnels in the Serapeum are really narrow, only about 2 feet wider than the boxes themselves. There's no way hundreds of people could have squeezed into those tight spaces to pull the boxes. And even if they did, how would they turn the box in the cramped corridor, lower it into its niche, and place it perfectly in the middle? Somehow they did this 24 times, and every box is centered perfectly. Plus, the chambers were dusty, and there were no signs of soot from lamps. This means they must have worked in almost complete darkness. The real use of the boxes could also be different. A long time ago, even before the Egyptian pharaohs ruled, the local people already knew how to use fermentation. It happens when tiny organisms called yeast eat certain ingredients like starch and turn them into gas and ethanol. So someone in ancient Egypt probably put food like barley, bread, and even meat inside a giant stone box, then closed it tight with a heavy lid. These stone boxes, carved from granite, were so precisely made that they were almost completely sealed, so nothing could escape from it. As the yeast inside the box started working, it created more and more CO2 gas. It built up pressure inside the box. The granite boxes were incredibly strong. They could handle more pressure than a car tire can hold. When granite was squeezed under such pressure, its crystals produced a tiny electric charge. This effect was possible because granite contains quartz, a material that reacts to pressure this way. The process also needed meat or animal parts, possibly to help the yeast grow better. Meat contains something called oleic acid, which yeast needs to keep growing and to survive the bad effects of the ethanol it produces. As the pressure inside the box kept growing, the combination of gases and electricity made these boxes not just ancient fridges, but powerful energy systems. Over time, the pressure inside got so strong that it could push the lid open and the gas would escape with a pop. But when people rediscovered the Serapeum in 1850, they found old drawings that showed piles of stones stacked on top of some of the box lids. So, someone long ago probably tried to make the lids even heavier by adding extra weight to make it harder for the gas pressure to push them open. This extra weight also meant the quartz crystals in the granite could keep creating more electricity under all that pressure. If someone opened one of these stone boxes thousands of years later, they would only find bones from bulls that were placed in the box. And that's exactly what Mariette discovered in the 1850s. They opened the Serapeum for visitors soon after the first excavations in the second half of the 19th century. Prince of Wales even had a luncheon with his guests in one of the sarcophagi. Sands and earthquakes made the site inaccessible for a while, but now you can visit it again and try to solve the mystery yourself. With new tech, we could have answers to many other historical mysteries soon. A team of scientists at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History recently used a special CT scanner to learn more about ancient Egyptian mummies without unwrapping them. They gently rolled 26 mummies on custom carts out to the parking lot, where the scanner was waiting. It took thousands of detailed X-ray pictures of each mummy and their coffins. When all the pictures were put together, they created 3D images that showed what was inside, the skeletons and some artifacts. The scientists hope these images will help them understand ancient Egyptian burial practices from over 3,000 years ago. Even though the scanning process only took 4 days, it might take 3 years to study all the data. But scientists were able to learn some personal details about the mummies. One of the most popular mummified individuals at the museum, Lady Chineta, was a woman who lived in ancient Egypt about 3,000 years ago. It looks like she passed away in her late 30s or early 40s. To make sure her body looked complete for the afterlife, embalmers put stuffing in her neck to keep it from collapsing. They also placed artificial eyes in her sockets, so she would have eyes in the next world. She was wrapped in fancy linen and placed in a beautifully decorated coffin. The scans revealed that it had been carefully crafted with a slit at the back, which embalmers used to fit the body. There were also some artistic details on the surface, like markings for her knees. It looks like her burial was on the scale of a high-end luxury car.